Hey there everybody, and welcome to part 12 of the upbge tutorial series where I teach you how to make video games using the Blender game engine. Now, for the last two parts, what we've been talking about is cameras, whether it be switching cameras between third person and kind of the sky view, or in the last part, we talked about field of view, how to change kind of the span of what we can see with the camera. But for this part, I want to keep talking about cameras, specifically camera shake. So, what we have so far, just so we are reminded, is we have our game. It starts with the sky camera, and we can collect coins and all this. And if we switch to the second camera, it's kind of this third person that we can change the field of view of. Now, the more dynamicness we add to this game, the more randomness, the same way we randomize the coins, I think the better this is going to look. One way to do that is with camera shake. Now, what I'm going to be teaching you in this tutorial, just so you know, is based on a tutorial that somebody else made. Just so you know, it's how to add camera shake in a Blender game engine. I'm basing it off of that. So, how are we going to do this? Basically, what we need to do is we need to make an animation for the camera where it shakes, and then we apply logic to when it does and doesn't play that animation. Simple as that. So, we're going to take our third-person camera, the one that is connected to the cube, and with that, we are going to go to the animation workspace, because this is where we're animating. Now, it probably makes sense to go into the camera view of this one, if that's the one we are animating. And we want to randomize not the position, but the rotation, which way it's looking. Okay? The way we do this is kind of the same way you'd randomize anything in Blender. You add a keyframe for a rotation, and then when you do that, you see we get a little keyframe over here. But what this lets us do is go into the graph editor and then add all kinds of modifiers to the X, Y, and Z rotation. So for example, I can take this X rotation, go to modifiers, and add in some noise. And then if I zoom out a little, you can see we get this random noise on the X-axis. If I play this, you can see the camera is now shaking very violently. So we have to make that less intense. The scale right here is basically going to say how fast is this playing. So I'm going to bring this up to like 3. So now it's going to be the same intensity, but slower, as you can see. And then the second strength is literally the intensity. So I'm going to bring it to like a third-ish. So now it's not as crazy. Okay? Last thing we're going to do for this X-axis rotation is I'm just going to increase the depth, which is going to make this more noisy, more detailed in a sense. So depth is kind of like level of detail. And this is going to add realism to the camera shake. Okay? Final things, I want this to be a tiny bit slower, and I think I'm happy with that. I'm just going to make it a bit more violent. So, once we start moving is the idea. When we hit W or S, I want it to start playing this animation. However, we also need to set it up so that when we're not hitting W and S, when we're done moving, it kind of calms down. So, initially, we have a big camera shake once you start moving, and then it should kind of settle down a little. How do we do that? Well, with this noise, we can enable a restrict frame range, which is going to say how many frames is this going to be existent for, and we can say only the first like 30 frames, okay? And you can see now the noise is contained here. It also starts abruptly and ends abruptly, so I recommend adding a bit of blending, which is going to kind of add a fade in and out. So now when we play this from the beginning, there's a bit of camera shake, and then it kind of goes away, okay? And I think this should be a bit faster and a bit more violent, just to start off. So, there we go, camera shake. Maybe not that intense. Okay? Next thing we need to do is we have to add just a bit of subtle shake so that it keeps shaking as we play the animation. And the way you do that is you just add more noise. So I'm going to add another noise modifier. I'm going to set it to addition, so it adds to the previous one. It doesn't replace it, but it adds noise. And then for this one, I'm really going to bring up the scale to something like 7, really decrease the strength. And you can see we still have our initial bump over here, but then some additional noise. Just like before, we want to kind of fade this in and out. So I'm going to blend in, and then I'm going to try to blend in. It doesn't seem to like that. Let's increase the animation range of this. So we're going to go from 0 to 250, because that's how long our project is. And then we're going to blend in. Now it's working, and blend out. So here is what this looks like currently. It starts violently, and then it just kind of has a gentle shake afterwards. Kind of inconsistent, so I'm going to add a bit of depth and add a tiny bit of strength, and make it go a bit faster. So you just experiment with this. So now we have camera shake, and then it kind of settles down to something that's less intense. Okay, perfect. Now all I want to do is I want to take this and kind of apply this to the same kind of thing on the z-axis, okay? To do this, you are just going to select a modifier, in this case this one, copy it to the clipboard, go to Z rotation, and paste it. And I guess it brings both of them. So now you can see it's also rotating on the z-axis. The issue is it's literally using the same noise. You can see both of these curves for the X and the Z are literally identical. So we just want to offset this one. So for the z-axis, just add a bit of offset, which is just saying kind of pick a different part of the noise, but it's still going to use the same overall parameters. And now the X and the Z are going to be a bit independent of each other. So you can see it starts off with violent camera shake, and then it, slows down a little. Okay? So this is our animation. If you go into the action editor now, or I guess the dope sheet or the nonlinear animation, let's go to the dope sheet and then go to action editor. You can see this action is called view to action. It only has a single keyframe, so it's not actually baked in there because this is just graph information. So to make sure this is keyframes, this is important. I'm going to also add a rotation keyframe at the end so that we have a full range, and then back in the graph editor, kind of skip this step, you're going to select all your keyframes, and then you are going to type sample keyframes, which I guess I already did. What this is going to do is it's going to turn your graph into literal keyframes that you can see in the dope sheet. So now we have our animation literally baked into frames. By the way, why does it look so violent? The reason is it has our animation, but it's now overlaying the stuff with the graph editor. So we now have to get rid of those. Okay? So now when we play our animation, we get our violent that then becomes less violent. And this is what we want to basically have play when we move. So again, if we go inside the dope sheet, you can see our animation, and I'm just going to call it shake. Or maybe I'll even call it camera shake in case we add more animations later. Okay, so basically we want to trigger camera shake under certain conditions. Right now, it's not necessarily going to do anything because we haven't triggered the animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the character, and the reason I'm going to the character node group is this is where we're checking, am I clicking W or am I clicking S? And, well, I guess we could also do this in the camera group. Maybe that's a bit cleaner. I'll go to the camera group and just add a little something here where it says if we are clicking forwards or backwards, so I'm going to do key down for holding down the W key or holding down the S key. And to make sure we're looking at both conditions, we can use a OR operator, which is basically the same as addition. So basically I'm saying if W is held down or S is held down, what we want to do is we want to play an animation. And there's literally a node for that. There's all kinds of animation stuff. Most of them are for armature type of animations. Either way, under the condition that W or S are pressed, we want to play the animation of our view to camera, that's the third person one, using the camera shake. A couple other things you want to make sure of is that the frame range for this is the same as our thing, so it's 250 frames, and for now this should work. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to go to the second view, and now you can see the moment I start moving, it's doing our camera shake. The issue with this though, so now it's working, is the moment I stop moving, it still has camera shake. So we want this to be able to die down a little too. Basically, what I want to do is I basically want to stop playing the animation if we're not holding down W or S. It turns out that there's a setting for this. You want to change play. In other words, when this condition is set, what is it going to do? It's going to play. You're going to set this to loop stop. What this means is it's going to loop the animation over and over and over again. So once it's complete, it's going to do it again. Hopefully you aren't holding it down for 250 frames. Otherwise, it's going to have that violent camera shake again. But we can assume that's not going to be the case. We're going to loop it, and then it's going to stop when we stop holding it down. Now, we might need to do a bit more to this. So let's see. I'm moving, and there we go. You can see when I stop moving, it automatically stops. Now, I believe if you do not have this checkbox clicked, it's going to be an issue. So let's see. I'm moving, and then I let go, and it's still moving. So make sure you have stop when done. And that's pretty good. I guess one thing we can do, to get a bit more animation out of this so it doesn't go back to the violent camera shake is we can do a ping pong stop, which should give us an extra 250 frames. So it's going to play, and then it's going to go backwards. And this will work with any field of view. And this just makes our game a bit more dynamic. It does look a bit ridiculous at the moment, but, you know, I think it adds a lot of character to our game. And you could kind of play around with what this camera shake looks like and do other animations that play at the same time by using more play animation nodes. But for now, I'm happy with that. So let's see what this looks like as a third-person game. I'm going to zoom out. We have our camera shake, collecting our coins. Let's jump up here, and there we go. And it's going to stop playing once we stop moving, and vice versa. Okay, beautiful. So we've added a camera shake. It's a bit complicated the way we implemented it. What you could have done is you could have done a set rotation and then randomize that. But I think this looks pretty good, and it kind of makes sense how to do it intuitively. So we talked about camera shake, and now we're going to do one more thing about cameras before we move on. And what is that going to be? It's going to be messing with this counter that says 5 coins. Remember? It's going to literally say how many coins we've collected, but it doesn't make sense that it's just hovering in 3D space over here. What I want it to do is to be in the bottom left corner, which is easy enough, but you can't just position it in 3D space to be on the bottom left corner because we're switching cameras. So it needs to always be on the bottom left if we're going to camera 1, 2, or if we add more cameras later. So that is going to require a new technique. So I'll see you on the next tutorial.